Hello and welcome to another edition of TCI Behind the Scenes. I'm your host, Yasmin Rigby Blues, and again I'm in the nation's capital. The topic for this show is the Turks and Caicos 10-Year Development Plan. Okay, and we'd like to welcome you, Mr. Jones, to TCI Behind the Scenes, and of course, something that's been heavy on my mind, and I'm sure on a lot of people's mind, what is going on with the National Development Plan, 10-Year Development Plan, which has been in the planning stages for a number of years now, and you're the key man for it all. Tell us about it.
Thank you for having me on the show, and thank you for the opportunity to bring the public, as it were, up to date on the status of the 10-year development plan. I acknowledge that we have taken a fair bit of time with the plan, but I'm happy to report that we are very close to finalization. As you will know, this month gives us about close to just a little under a year, and we've just had the final national workshop, meaning that we brought together persons from all of the islands, and prior to that we had island meetings to talk to people about what the plan means for them and their islands. Coming out of the final national workshop, we should be in a position to fine-tune all of the priorities and projects that would be recommended for implementation coming out of the plan.
What are some of the main points in the 10-year development plan?
Well, before proceeding, I would like to say that over the last months, we've actually met with well over 1,000 people. We had over 22 committees looking at just about every aspect of socio-economic and environmental issues that would be facing the Turks and Caicos Islands. We also consulted with existing sector plans and other published information. So what I would want to do before proceeding is to say that we have come up with something so far which is really reflective of what the average person, be it in the public sector, the private sector, would want to say. And I want to thank them for participating in the process so far, because ultimately when we started out on the process, we wanted to consult as widely as possible all across the length and the breadth of the Turks and Caicos Islands, and I'm pleased to say we actually achieved that. Now, coming out of the plans of the process so far, we have a national development strategy, then we have a national development action plan, because one of the critical things about the plan is not just to talk, but to create a framework for action. Coming out of the action plan, we have a number of goals, we have a number of targets, we have a number of indicators of success. We have identified agencies, be it the public sector, the private sector, government departments, which will be responsible for implementing those projects or programs. And we have also island plans, which again reflect the way the people on the various islands indicate they would like to see their islands develop over the next 10 years. And finally, the last output is the medium-term socio-economic development framework, which again is linked directly to the budget. So what we see here is that we have a 10-year plan, which should be linked to implemented over three-year installments. Because one of the criticisms of development planning from a lot of countries is that it ends up being a wish list. It is not linked to a clear resource framework. So what we have decided to do with the plan, with the National Socioeconomic Development Framework, is to take the most pressing priorities that people identify and try to use that framework as a basis for national action to inform budgets, government departments' action, their budgets over the next 3 years. So we have a clear link with the budget process. But more than that, we have a clear framework for discussion, because development is very dynamic. I'm sure we would not have imagined 10 years ago that the internet or developments in information and communications technologies will have been affecting the way we do things. So because of that, dear, we have to build within the plan a framework for us to make informed decisions, to embrace new opportunities and address new challenges as they arise from time to time. So it is within the next 3 years, the socioeconomic development framework, when all of this will take place. So what I will say is that, you know, we have actually really only just started the process of consultation. We're talking about some of the recommendations, in addition to the various projects, is that we should put in place a mechanism so we can actually monitor the progress we are making with the plan. So there's a call for us to set up a mechanism which would consist of public and private sector persons so we can monitor the progress that we are making with implementing the plan. So ultimately, I hope that we would be in a position to implement a lot of what was talked about in the plan, link it to the budget, such that it wouldn't be, as would happen in a lot of countries, just another talk shop.
Okay. Now, this means that the National Development Plan has not been finalized. It's continuing. You're hoping to finish it next year. Mm-hmm. And even when it comes into being, there will still be developments going on that will be inputted into it?
Yeah, well, as it is right now, the consultants recommended, they've spoken widely as they indicated. And at the last meeting, we had discussions on a plan which required about $2 billion over the next 10 years, which is on average about $200 million per year. Of course, there are capacity issues, even if we could have mobilized $200 million. I'm not sure we are in a position to actually absorb that in terms of our manpower limitations. So what we have to do now, coming out of the discussion, the last workshop, is we have to further prioritize those the projects and priorities. And what is suggested is that there would be like a phased implementation of the recommendations of the plan. So what will happen is, right now, the government probably absorbs about, say, a little under $85 million per year on capital projects, because the $200 million per year is actually capital projects we're talking about mostly. Mm-hmm. So we're talking about having to step that up, mm-hmm. right? And I can see us moving, say, from where we are now to probably about 120, stepping up to 150. So towards the end of the plan, we probably be, probably more than 200 million. But then, that will allow us to absorb that amount. We have to address capacity issues. Of course, there are issues related to how do we go about collecting or gathering this additional money, which will have implications for revenue as well as debt. So there are a lot of issues which we still need to factor in. And I suspect what will happen is that there will still be a need for further debate. We still have to, once we've finally prioritized this, we have to make a formal submission to the cabinet, and they will have to give further endorsement to it. And coming out of the workshop, people suggested that we should probably have the plan debated at the House of Assembly level. So there is a lot of work to be done still. And also what we're hoping to do in the government itself is, as we go about starting to prepare the 2008-2009 budget, is to have departments start to try and factor in. Because the critical thing about all of this is we've expended a fair bit of money in terms of money and also in terms of time to go to the islands, to talk to people. And we have an opportunity with the plan to really implement some of the things what the people say. And I think that is important. I want to stress that we really want, as part of the planning process, to have a scenario where people see issues that they raise being actually addressed through budgets and government and policies and programs coming forward. I think that's key.
Okay. And of course, raising revenue, which will raise a lot of eyebrows, which of course raises the question, taxes.
Well, I wouldn't want to go there because I'm sure that has been debated, but suffice to say that, we will have to look at that issue. I know the Honorable Premier and the Deputy Premier have made statements to that effect. And I think the Ministry of Finance, as the technical branch of government, would have to marshal its resources to achieve the government's policy objective when it comes to revenue or taxation issues. But what I will say is that there are certain theoretical perspectives which need to come to bear in any study of revenue in terms of, whether it's the social impact, the economic impact, the administrative efficiency, the need for public awareness and all of that there. So we will certainly have to implement the government's policy objective consistent with good practice in these areas. I think I'm not at liberty to elaborate more on that for the time.
Okay. A question I've asked before, but many of the different departments have already established their own 5 and 3 and 2 year plans that they're working on at present. How does that fit in with this plan?
Well, again, that's a good question, because I agree with you that a lot of people say that one of the things in the Turks and Caicos is that we don't suffer from the lack of having a lot of different plans. And what this plan did, it was cognizant of all of those plans. And what we tried to do is allow a consistent framework for the implementation, rather than saying that, education have their 5-year plan, health have a sector plan, DEPS have a plan, this one have a plan, all of them being implemented in a disjointed way. So with the plan, what we try to do is integrate all of those plans such that the implementation would be in a consistent way. Because you will find that, for instance, in development, there are what you call lead sectors, right? And you will find that the lead sectors would probably be the areas that will generate revenue. Say, for instance, economic diversification, or strengthening of the financial sector, or expanding the tourism sector. So these sectors grow and develop, then we have more money coming in, which we can then redistribute to the social sectors, which are not necessarily generating revenue, but are equally important in the development process. Because if you look at the development experience of places like, say, the Southeast Asian nations, Singapore or Taiwan or South Korea, what has marked their development is an emphasis on human development. So what we try to do in the plan is to balance the lead sectors with the other social sectors, which are not necessarily generating revenue. And one of the high recommendations in the plan is that about 60% of all of the new investment will actually be going into the social areas.
Okay. And what would you say would be the most important area for the Turks and Caicos? Well,
the plan addressed a number of challenges facing the islands, right? And right now we are on a high growth path where, for instance, over the last few years, real economic growth has been, say, over 10% per year, which is probably some of the highest in the Caribbean. So the main emphasis on the plan is how do we actually sustain this growth, right? How do we actually promote balanced development? Because a lot of the development has been concentrated in Provo. Thankfully, over the last few years, through the government, some anchor tourism development projects, we have had, Grand Turk being revitalized, there's projects being, North Caicos, Middle Caicos, which is good. The question then moves to, sure, we have balanced development, we have sustained economic development. How do we promote that development without negative consequences for the environment, which is actually the foundation of the development? The second set of issues is how do we go about recognizing that there are social issues related to development? Because, for instance, and I don't want to get into the population issue, but we have to recognize that people will be coming in. The question is, how do we actually absorb them into our society? How do we better determine who we want to come in? Then another set of issues are how do we actually go about ensuring that the Turks and Caicos Islanders are actually at the forefront of the development process. So the plan actually addresses all of this. It suggests, we should be trying to take on a less labor-intensive path to development, such that you'll be bringing in higher skilled persons. Because if you look at your GDP or per capita income, if you bring in low skilled persons, your population will be going up. But technically, with more people, you'll be actually lowering your per capita income. So we're talking about a more qualitative, type of development, with the Turks and Caicos Islanders always at the fore through education, development, proper health, healthy lifestyles, fitness to be first, right? And we're talking about better absorbing those who have to come into the society, into a proper melting pot, if I can use that expression from the American development experience.
Speaking of the Americans, we're going to take a break, come right back to that thought. Be back in a moment. Welcome back to TCI Behind the Scenes, and we're discussing the 10-year development plan with the now permanent secretary for the Ministry of Finance, Mr. Dalton Jones. And as we were talking about the Americans, a question. At the moment in America, they're looking at possibly and rather afraid of slipping into a recession. And whenever anything happens there, it really affects the rest of the Caribbean and, of course, us.
Certainly.
So with a thought of moving our revenue, our output up to, 200 million?
That's additional investment of about 200 million per year.
How do we how are we planning for this?
Well, you're correct that I think there's a saying that, when America sneezes, the Caribbean catches the cold. And I think that is why one of the key issues addressed in the plan was economic diversification. I think it is fair to say that for the time being, tourism would continue to be the mainstay of our economy. I think with so many different islands, we have an opportunity to present a varied product. And I think that is what the plan is saying, that each island has certain attributes which need to be maximized as part of their own island development plan. So we're talking about, firstly, diversification within the tourism sector. Then we're also talking about how do we go about looking at other sectors. The financial sector has been the second pillar of our economy. How do we go about improving its prospects? And I think when they had the last session of the Parliament, we talked about the government announced that a number of product legislation would be coming on stream shortly. So that's a plan to shore up that sector. There are other sectors such as agriculture, aquaculture that we need to develop. We're also talking about how do we go about taking advantage of information